South Wales was host to many kingdoms, and some of them are still there today through modern county names or borough names, like Gwent, which is separated into a few different counties and is still a region technically, or Brycheiniog through the anglicised name of a borough, which is called Brecknock. You can kind of see how similar they are. And one of these kingdoms isn't, though, Glussing, and that's unfair considering it was one of the first Welsh kingdoms to exist, and it's got a long and storied history, and considering its illustrious heritage. So, let's get started. So, Glussing started in 383 with King Eugenius, the son of Magnus Maximus, a Roman usurper and a major figure in Welsh, Breton and Cornish folklore, as he essentially seen as giving us independence and more autonomy through his sons and generals, who he essentially left in command of these provinces. For instance, Conan Meriadoc, when he conquered Brittany, or Armorica as it was called at that point, he gave Conan command of it, and Conan is sort of like the father figure to most of the old Breton royalty at that point. And Eugenius, for example, is one in South Wales, as he ruled over what was called Cernyw at the time, but later became known as Glussing. And so he would rule from 383 to 440. So Eugenius' son Marius ruled for a decade from 440 to 450, and then Congal, the son of Marius, ruled after him from 450, but we don't know when he died. His brother Solar ruled until 470, so it's safe to assume that he'd died by the 460s at the earliest, or maybe a bit later. But Solar died in 470 and his son Glowis succeeded him. Glowis married Gwawel, the oldest daughter of King Cered Ceredigion. According to legend, they had 21 sons and one daughter. Later on in life, Glowis became a hermit in Cornwall, where he founded the Church of St Glwvias near Penrhyn. Glowis died in 480 and his realm split into four separate kingdoms: Gwynllwg, Penychen, Gorfynydd and Edelygion. At this point, I'm going to separate these four kingdoms into separate sections of the video, because the kingdom itself, Glussing, stops existing for a few centuries, and it's either in the form of these four kingdoms on their own or the union with Gwent. So the first kingdom is Gwynllwg, and so Gwynllwg covered the eastern portion of Glussing, and its first king is St Gwynllyw Filwr, or Gwynllyw the Soldier. And so to the east, the kingdom bordered Gwent, and to the north it bordered Brycheiniog. Alright, so Gwynllyw himself actually has a biography, and inside the biography it states that he was a just and fair man, but his son St Cadog also has a biography, and that describes him completely different, as they say that he was very partial to thieves and used to instigate them somewhat often to robberies. I believe that both descriptions could be true, but at different portions of his life, as he ruled for close to 40 years, and that is an incredibly long time, and you definitely make some changes along that way. Both versions do agree that he raided neighbouring kingdoms mercilessly, like Brycheiniog for example. So according to the life of St Cadog, Gwynllyw led 300 men north into Brycheiniog, and he abducted Princess Gladys, one of King Brychan's daughters. A battle would then ensue, but the intervention of King Arthur stopped any more fighting. The battle was already heavy on Gwynllyw's men, as he'd lost 200 out of 300 by that point. On the other hand, the life of St Gwynllyw says that the marriage was diplomatic in nature and that he didn't abduct her. Honestly, I like to think that the first version is correct, St Cadog, as it matches his character more. So his wife Gladys soon fell pregnant and gave birth to Cadog, a later saint again and king. To celebrate this, Gwynllyw went and raided Caerwent and Gwent. St Tathw asked him to return some cows that Gwynllyw had stolen from Caerwent, and so Gwynllyw, impressed by his bravery, agreed, and he sent his son Cadog to Tathw to be educated as well. Honestly, I say that's like a massive win for Tathw. Not only does he get his cows back, but he also gets to educate a neighbouring king in the ways of Christianity, and so it's like he gets to influence the next generation in an important way. Life, Gwynllyw became a hermit after the vision of an angel who spoke to him. He also saw a white cow with a black spot on its head in the vision, so Gwynllyw would then set out to find the cow he saw. So he'd find the cow near Stow Hill, which is near modern-day Newport, and he'd build his hermitage there, and his wife would also follow him into the life of a hermit. Gladys later would found her own hermitage near Pencarn, and to this day that's where they built his church in Newport, on the exact hill supposedly. On his deathbed, his son St Cadog and St Dovrig would deliver him his final rites, and he died on March 29th of 529. So before Cadog became king, he would be educated by St Tathw and Caerwent, as I mentioned previously. And Cadog would learn Latin, and he had a good education in rulership and Christianity. He would found a church at Llancafarn in the Kingdom of Penychan, which was owned by his uncle. The story claims that Cadog was pursued by armed men and he ran into a forest where he saw a boar that charged at him, but it disappeared mysteriously, and so he built a church there as he believed it was a miracle from God. So Cadog refused to fight in his father's wars and raids. Instead, he went all over trying to convert people in Scotland, Brittany, Ireland and Rome. He spent nearly 3 years in Ireland studying Christianity and converting the locals. And so the early years of his reign were pretty peaceful from what we can tell, and he'd inherited his uncle King Powell of Penychan the throne in 540, as Powell had no children. And it's unclear whether or not Powell had inherited his other brothers' kingdoms, as they'd all died 40 years previously. The kings of Edyligion and the king of Gorfynydd, which was Mechwyn, and King Edylig. They'd both died, but it's unclear which one died first. And so, back to it, nothing happened again for the next 50 years, again really peaceful up until 590, when an army of Anglo-Saxons killed him. It's not said what happened, so I'd assume he hadn't gone to war of his own volition. I assume he was invaded and that he was forced to fight. So Cadog had no children, and then his throne would pass on to the nearest male relative, technically, and that would be King Meirig of Gwent. So the second kingdom to come out of the division of Glywysing was Penychan, and it was given to Powell Penychan. So, again, 480, King Glywys died, and then Powell got his throne. Not much is known about him, but he did help his nephew and later his heir, Cadog, build a church near Llancafarn. He died in 540, and his throne passed to Cadog of Gwynethllog and later to Meirig of Gwent after Cadog died in battle against the Saxons. At least that's what I think happened. It's only mentioned that Saxons killed him, so we're not really sure what happened, but I think that probably makes more sense. Gorfynydd was the third kingdom to come out of King Glywys's death. So Mechwyn, one of his sons, took over, and we don't know much about from him apart from the fact that he died in the year 500. But his kingdom might have passed on to his brother Powell, or before that it could have briefly passed on to his brother Edylig of Edyligion, but we're not certain, as they both died in 500. The same as the other kingdoms, Edyligion formed in 480 after the death of Glywys, and so the location of the kingdom isn't actually stated. However, I think it's likely that the far west of Glywysing, the cantref of Gwir, or the Gower Peninsula in modern day, is its location. So it's the first and only king it ever had is Edylig. He ruled until 500, but it's unclear if he outlived his brother Mechwyn or died first, so he might have briefly inherited Gorfynydd and ruled as the United King of Gorfynydd and Edyligion, likely having the largest amount of land, but we're not for sure. So, as I said again, all these kingdoms fell under Gwent's control until Rhys ap Idwal took over as King of Glywysing in 755. In the next part we will explore the second resurgence of Glywysing, and so thanks for watching and stay tuned.